So I want to talk some more about the crimes, the war crimes, the murders that this scumbag criminal piece of shit in the White House and Pete Hegseth have been committing in the Caribbean by blowing up these boats and murdering people. I talked about this earlier today, how Donald Trump is clearly setting it up to make Pete Hegseth the scapegoat. He was Trump was asked questions by reporters aboard Air Force One yesterday about the reporting that there were survivors of the very first boat attack on September 2nd, and that Pete Hegseth is reported to have ordered that the survivors who were clinging to wreckage in the water, clearly not a threat to anyone, that Pete Hegseth ordered that they be killed, which would be a war crime and murder if this is true. And Trump, when asked about it, pretended that he didn't really know too much about it, and that he would not have ordered a follow up strike on those survivors, and that Pete Hegseth has denied that happened. So Trump is saying, "Well, I wouldn't do that," but Hegseth is denying it, so I don't really have to think about it. So he's setting this up to where if this is actually proven, and the Armed Services Committee, both in the Senate and the House of Representatives, has said that they are going to vigorously investigate it. So if it is established that this reporting is accurate, and the pressure mounts over this, that Donald Trump has already set it up to where he will just make Pete Hegseth the scapegoat, maybe fire him or whatever he's going to do. But so I talked about that this morning. Now, just to show you how serious this is not just, a bunch of left wingers who are defending drug smugglers now. Because if you go on these idiot spaces on social media where your average rank and file, mindless Trump cultist, where they go to talk to each other, basically what they're saying is they all support this. They're perfectly fine with blowing up and killing whoever for whatever reason. If Trump says they're a drug smuggler, then kill them. They don't care. And that they're framing it as, if you have any problem with this, then you're just defending drug smugglers, which is, of course, how they always do this. So, if Trump is rounding up some people he says are illegal aliens in the country and sends them off to third world prison camps in El Salvador, then if you have a problem with that, if you have a problem with the lack of due process, then you're defending illegal aliens, you're defending gang members, because that's what he said. They're part of a gang, they're Tren de Aragua or whoever the hell. And so if you have any problem with the fact that Trump is having people kidnapped off the street, violating court orders, they're being deported with no due process, if you have any problem with the illegality of that, then you're just defending gang members and terrorists. So that's how they always frame this stuff. But if you are, if when you go outside of just the MAGA trolls on social media, your typical MAGA moron, people even on the right know how awful this is and how criminal this is. And I've got an article here from the National Review, obviously a conservative publication, and this piece was written by Andrew McCarthy. Now, looking at his Twitter bio, he describes himself, for those of you who aren't familiar with Andrew McCarthy, he describes himself here as a best-selling author, contributing editor at National Review, and fellow at the NR Institute. I'm assuming that's the National Review Institute. I guess. I honestly don't know. Fox News contributor and former chief assistant U.S. attorney. So he is brought on Fox News all the time to discuss legal matters, and he knows how illegal this is. And I will link this article, but I want to read a substantial portion of this because You wouldn't know that this is a Fox News contributor if you just read these words and you didn't know who wrote it. So let me read this. He begins this way. An explosive Washington Post report, the subject of so much discussion the past 2 days, says that in the first missile strike the Trump Defense Department carried out against operatives of a boat suspected of transporting narcotics on the high seas off Venezuela, 2 survivors were rendered shipwrecked. As they clung to the wreckage, the U.S. commander ordered a second strike, which killed them. By the way, I notice here that he refers to the Trump Defense Department. He doesn't call it the War Department. So good on him, because it's not the freaking War Department. Continuing, if this happened as described in the Post report, it was, at best, a war crime under federal law. I say at best because, as regular readers know, I believe the attacks on the suspected drug boats, without congressional authorization, under circumstances in which the boat operators pose no military threat to the United States, and given that narcotics trafficking is defined in federal law as a crime rather than as a terrorist activity, much less a war crime, are lawless, and therefore that the killings are not legitimate under the law of armed conflict. This is what I have been saying from the very beginning of all this. When we first learned about these strikes back in September, I said these are flatly illegal. The only time a president can take lethal military action like this is if it was authorized by Congress, which clearly here it was not, or if they are acting in the immediate defense of the country against a threat that is so imminent and so serious that there is no time to go to Congress to seek authorization for the use of force, and that it requires immediate lethal force to defend the country. That is obviously not the case here. We're talking about small, at worst, if Trump is to be believed, and there's a lot of good reason to believe that he's lying about this, or in at least with respect to some of them. If you believe his line that these are drug smugglers, even then, they're no threat. They're smuggling drugs. They're guys in a boat with some cocaine 1,000 miles off the coast of the United States. This is not a threat. It's certainly not an imminent threat, but it's not a threat of any kind against the United States to the point that it requires lethal military action. So he gets this exactly right. Let me continue. Where the hell did I leave off? Bear with me here. Okay. Nevertheless, even if we stipulate arguendo that the administration has a colorable claim that our forces are in an armed conflict with non-state actors, i.e. suspected members of drug cartels that the administration has dubiously designated as foreign terrorist organizations, the laws of war do not permit the killing of combatants who have been rendered incapable of fighting, including by shipwreck. To reiterate, I don't accept that the ship operators are enemy combatants, even if one overlooks that the administration has not proven that they are drug traffickers or members of designated FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations. There is no armed conflict. They may be criminals if it is proven that they are importing illegal narcotics, but they are not combatants. My point, nevertheless, is that even if you buy the untenable claim that they are combatants, it is a war crime to intentionally kill combatants who have been rendered unable to fight. It is not permitted under the laws and customs of honorable warfare to order that no quarter be given, to apply lethal force to those who surrender or who are injured, shipwrecked, or otherwise unable to fight. According to the Post, 2 unidentified sources said prior to the September 2nd attack that killed at least 11 people, that Secretary Pete Hegseth gave a spoken directive, which one source described as, quote, the order was to kill everybody. The operation, led by SEAL Team 6, was directed from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, by Admiral Frank M. Mitch Bradley, then the head of Joint Special Operations Command. Admiral Bradley is said to have ordered the attack against the two survivors of the first strike in order to comply with Hegseth's directive to kill the boat operators. Two sources told the Post. Bradley told people on the secure conference call that the survivors were still legitimate targets because they could theoretically call other traffickers to retrieve them and their cargo. By the way, let me stop right here. This guy, Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley, he is a war criminal. It's not just Donald Trump. It is not just Pete Hegseth. Now, if Donald Trump, look, the reporting is that Pete Hegseth ordered this. I want to be clear. We don't know. We know that Donald Trump obviously ordered these boat strikes, which in my mind makes him a war criminal and a murderer because, as I explained, he has no legal authorization to do this. So right then and there, for that reason alone, in my opinion, he's a war criminal and a murderer. But with this, to this specific allegation that we're talking about here, that these survivors clinging to wreckage in the water were killed, we don't know, and there's no reporting that Donald Trump knew specifically about that or gave an order for that specifically. So I want to be clear. The reporting is that Pete Hegseth gave that order. So with respect to that specific claim, Pete Hegseth is a murderer and a war criminal, and so too is Mitch Bradley, Admiral Mitch Bradley. And by the way, remember, we had all of this talk over the last couple of weeks about this video recorded by Democratic members of Congress who are former military and former CIA, and they made this video advising members of the military that they are obligated by their oaths, by the Constitution, and by our laws to refuse illegal orders, right? And of course, the right went insane. Trump accused them of treason, suggested they should be put to death. This is exactly what they're talking about. This is exactly the kind of illegal order that members of the military are obligated, legally obligated to refuse. And yet, look what happens. You have Pete Hegseth reportedly arguing that they be killed, and you have this Admiral Mitch Bradley carrying out those orders and ordering those, subordinate to him to actually carry out these lethal attacks and to murder these people stranded in the water. This Mitch Bradley is a war criminal, if this is true, and a murderer. And unless Pete Hegseth gets a pardon, unless Mitch Bradley, Admiral Mitch, gets a pardon, and anyone else below him who carried out these orders and murdered those people, SEAL Team 6 and so forth, they too are war criminals and murderers. Unless all of them get pardons, they can be prosecuted. And if Trump does not prosecute them, then in January of 2029, God willing, there is a Democratic president in the Oval Office. He can order this investigated and prosecuted if warranted. And that includes Pete Hegseth, Admiral Mitch, and anyone who carried out this illegal order. All right, let me continue. Hegseth, responding to the Post report on Twitter, begins with the familiar pining about how all derogatory reporting about the Trump administration is, quote, fake news, but then doesn't actually rebut any assertion in the report. He does state, this is from Twitter, this is what Hegseth wrote, as we've said from the beginning, and in every statement, these highly effective strikes are specifically intended to be lethal kinetic strikes. The declared intent is to stop lethal drugs, destroy narco boats, and kill the narco terrorists who are poisoning the American people. End of that quote. Neither Hegseth's statement nor the explanation attributed to Bradley and excerpted above make legal sense. The laws of war, as they are incorporated into federal law, make lethal force unlawful if it is used under certain circumstances. Hence, it cannot be a defense to say, as Hegseth does, that one has killed one. Let me try this sentence again. Hence, it cannot be a defense to say, as Hegseth does, that one has killed because one's objective was lethal kinetic strikes. Moreover, if an arguable combatant has been rendered unable to fight, targeting him with lethal force cannot be rationalized, as Bradley is said to have done, by theorizing that it was possible at some future point that the combatant could get help and be able to contribute once again to enemy operations. The 1949 Geneva Conventions were ratified by the United States. Consequently, Common Article 3 of the convention binds our government. He goes on to talk about Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions, and since we are signatories to those conventions, we are bound by that. It is therefore part of our law. Further, Congress has incorporated grave breaches of Common Article 3 in the Penal Code's War Crimes Statute, Section 2441 of our United States Code, when committed in the context of and in association with an armed conflict not of an international character, which is how the administration describes its operations in the Caribbean. So we actually have a statute on the books adopting Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions and incorporating it into our penal laws, our criminal laws. These grave breaches include murder, which is defined as follows: the act of a person who intentionally kills, or conspires or attempts to kill, or kills whether intentionally or unintentionally, in the course of committing any other offense under this subsection, one or more persons taking no active part in the hostilities, including those placed out of combat by sickness, wounds, detention, or any other cause. Other offenses under the subsection include intentionally causing serious bodily injury. I do not mean to be melodramatic, especially because, as I've discussed with Rich, he's referring to Rich Lowry, I'm assuming, on the podcast, President Trump is undoubtedly going to pardon any administration officials in potential legal jeopardy. But the penalty for a war crimes violation is life imprisonment or death if the criminal act results in death. Finally, I would observe that, again, if the Post report is accurate, Hegseth and his commanders changed the protocols after the September attack to emphasize rescuing suspected smugglers if they survived strikes. This is why 2 survivors in a subsequent strike on October 16th were captured and then repatriated to their native countries. By the way, before I finish this up, I would expect that Trump would pardon Hegseth, this piece of shit Mitch Bradley, the admiral, and anyone else in the chain of command who carried out these illegal acts. And there's nothing we can do about that. If he pardons them, he pardons them. And Trump himself is not going to be held accountable for this because of the Supreme Court's disgusting opinion on presidential immunity, which I am sure they would say applies in this situation. That having been said, they can be pardoned, but this is still an impeachable offense. This is certainly impeachable against Trump, who ordered all of this from the beginning, these illegal boat strikes. Pete Hegseth should be impeached and removed from this. And, you know, this piece of shit, Mitch, whatever the fuck, Bradley, he should be removed from his position, and everyone else who carried out this illegal order. But Hegseth and Trump should be, I mean, I know this is not likely to happen. I'm not going to say it's impossible that these two get impeached and removed from office. And honestly, things are starting to look more possible on the impeachment front than they were just a couple of months ago. I still don't believe we're going to get anywhere with impeachment and removal so long as Republicans control the majority. But the midterm elections are less than a year away. And things could be a hell of a lot different after that. And, you know, we can only do what we can do when we can do it. So, but if this were a healthy, functioning republic, then we would seriously be talking about impeaching, removing, and prosecute these criminal thugs. Let me finish this up. Here he was talking about how they clearly changed the protocols after the September 2nd strike, where they blew up the two survivors, because then on October 16th, there were some survivors. And what did we do? Did we take them into custody? Did we prosecute them? Did we interrogate them? No. We repatriated them to their country of origin, which doesn't make any damn sense, does it? These people are such a threat to the United States that we need to kill them. But if they survive, we're just going to send them back to their home countries. We're not even going to prosecute them for drug smuggling or whatever the hell else you're going to accuse them of. No, we just send them back. They're free to go. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Anyway, let me just finish this article up. Referring to repatriating these guys back to their countries of origin, McCarthy writes, this was a ludicrous outcome. Under prior policy, meaning before the criminal Trump administration, under prior policy, the boat would have been interdicted, the drugs seized, and the operators transferred to federal court for prosecution and hefty sentences. Under the Trump administration's policy, if the operators survive our missiles, they get to go back home and rejoin the drug trade. They get to go right back to smuggling drugs into our country, which is so bad that we need to blow them up. But yeah, you go right back to doing that. But put that aside. The point is that if the administration's intent to apply lethal force were a defense to killing shipwrecked suspected drugs traffickers, the policy wouldn't have been changed. It was changed because Hegseth knows he can't justify killing boat operators who survive attacks. And he sends them home rather than detaining them as enemy combatants because, similarly, there is no actual armed conflict. So there is no basis to detain them as enemy combatants. This is a very serious matter. The administration's defense can't be that we killed them because our plan is to use lethal force. This is obviously a good piece by McCarthy. I will link it in the description below. But this, when you are hearing this from the contributing editor at National Review and a Fox News legal contributor and a former chief assistant U.S. attorney, I mean, the guy's a serious lawyer, a serious former prosecutor, and he is in the Fox News world. He is on the MAGA right. He has made excuses for Donald Trump. You know, I'll be honest, I've been disgusted by McCarthy over the years because I've always considered him to be a stand-up guy, but he has turned himself into friggin' pretzels defending so much of what Donald Trump has done, even though I know damn well that he knows so much of it is illegal and unconstitutional. I think he's reached a point he can't keep doing it. This is murder. You know, other things he has defended, you know, were not literal war crimes and literally murder. Apparently that's a bridge too far for McCarthy, and he's calling out, he's not going to defend murder and war crimes, I guess. And so I hope we see more and more of this. As I said, these mindless drones, you know, who are on social media, they don't give a shit. They don't care if it's murder or not. They really don't. They will defend literally anything Trump does. But the Republican politicians, most of them, they know better. They know it's a crime. They know that this is not legal. And they are, I hope they're true to their word, about to launch a serious, as they said, a vigorous investigation into these killings. So, this is bad. This should bring down Trump and certainly Hegseth. Don't know that it will. Not saying that it will. But these are the kinds of things, as I've been saying, just like Epstein, with this law being passed to release the Epstein files, these are things that they could spin out of control for Trump. Let's hope that that is the case here, because this criminal regime needs to be taken down and to the fullest extent possible brought to justice. Anyway, I'm sure we'll be talking about this more because it looks like we are preparing for war, an illegal war, a war with Venezuela, which would be just as illegal as these boat strikes because it's not a defensive war. It's not done for the immediate defense of our country, and it's not being authorized by Congress. So it is flatly illegal. And why are we doing it? It's not even popular. The polls show that even most Republicans are not in favor of us starting a war with Venezuela. He's doing it because he's desperate to change the subject from Epstein. So I think as we get closer to the required release date for these Epstein files to start coming out, I think that's when, if he's going to do it, that's when he's going to launch attacks on Venezuela to kick the Epstein release of these files, to kick that out of the news and focus attention on war. And he will keep the war going as long as he feels that he needs to. This man is a danger to the country, to the world. He's a fucking criminal. He should be impeached, removed, and prosecuted. Can't be prosecuted for this, more than likely, but he's committed a lot of crimes to which the Supreme Court's immunity decision does not apply. So again, he should be impeached, removed, and prosecuted. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.